So like one day I was at SEAL Team 3 and we were doing some shooting training, and I was walking, it was 5 a.m, and I was walking toward the range. I felt as if, I say as if, but I felt as if someone put their hand on my shoulder and whispered, stop. But it was like a forceful, like, stop now. And I stopped. And the moment I stopped, a teammate of mine had an accidental discharge, and the bullet went like zoomed right by my right ear. Had I taken that next step, it would have gone in the back of my head. That's intuition.
Hello, and welcome to a new episode of Muscle for Life. Thank you for joining me today. I'm your host, Mike Matthews, and in today's episode, I have my buddy Mark Devine back on the podcast to talk about the material in his newest book that he released a few months ago called Uncommon. And so today's episode is going to be about what it means to be and to become uncommon in body, in mind, in soul. And that means building physical and psychological, emotional, spiritual resilience and awareness and capacity. And then using those things to build confidence, to improve emotional control, to overcome self-doubts, to improve decision-making, to enhance focus and clarity, and break through negative thought patterns, to find more purpose in life, and more. And all of those things are what Mark is going to be talking about in today's episode. And in case you are not familiar with Mark, he is a former Navy SEAL. He is a best-selling author. He is the founder of SEAL Fit and several other companies. And in his books and in his writings and in his speeches, he shares his approach to cultivating mental toughness, inner strength, and what he calls a warrior mindset for personal growth. Before we get started, there are very few supplements that I would say everyone should be taking. Most supplements are very supplemental by definition. They're not essential. An exception, however, a supplement that I do think everyone should at least strongly consider taking is creatine. Now, you probably know that creatine is the most studied molecule in all of sports nutrition. You probably know that hundreds of studies confirm that it can safely boost muscle and strength gains and improve muscular endurance. It can reduce muscle damage and soreness from exercise, helping you recover faster from your training. It can help you preserve lean mass and strength while you are restricting your calories during a cut, so you can maximally improve your body composition when you're cutting, which is the goal. It's not weight loss per se, it's fat loss and muscle gain, or at least muscle retention. However, what you might not know is that there is new research suggesting that creatine also supports various aspects of brain health and cognition. And that's why experts are now starting to think of creatine as less of a fitness supplement for meatheads and more of a must-have supplement for everyone, like vitamin D or vitamin K or omega-3 fatty acids, a few supplements that I also think everyone should strongly consider taking. And all that is why I should have done this a long time ago. This was a mistake, but I just released a micronized creatine monohydrate supplement, or my sports nutrition company Legion has just released a micronized creatine monohydrate supplement, which you can find over at buylegion.com/creatine. That's BUYlegion.com/creatine. And in case you're wondering why creatine monohydrate versus another, maybe more exotic form, or at least exotic sounding form like creatine citrate or creatine malate, it's because creatine monohydrate is the most studied form. It is the gold standard in the scientific literature of creatine's effectiveness. And contrary to what many marketers would have you believe, research has also shown that a number of these other more quote-unquote exotic forms of creatine actually perform worse than creatine monohydrate. And in case you are wondering about the micronized part, that simply means that the creatine molecules have been broken down into very small particles, up to 20 times smaller than regular creatine monohydrate crystals. And the primary benefit is solubility. It mixes in water better, and it also can be easier on your stomach. Some people can get an upset stomach from creatine, and they often don't get an upset stomach from micronized creatine. There also are some claims about enhanced absorption with micronized creatine monohydrate, faster and more efficient uptake by muscle cells, but I think that is mostly speculation. So the bottom line is creatine is not going to help you pack on brain shrinking amounts of muscle in 30 days. It's not going to add another plate or two to the bar, but it is going to help you train harder. It's going to help you recover better. It's going to help you gain muscle and strength faster. And contrary to the supplement fake news, it's not bad for your kidneys. It doesn't cause men to lose their hair, and it won't make you bloated. So if you want to see for yourself, head over to buylegion.com/creatine, buylegion.com/creatine, pick up a bottle, take 5 grams a day if you are mostly after the performance and body composition benefits, and take 10 grams per day if you want to also maximally benefit your brain health and cognition, because that is the amount that research is suggesting is optimal for both body composition, physical performance, and mental health or brain health and cognition, and see how it goes. Hey, Mark, it's good to see you again.
You too, Mike. Thanks for having me on your show, buddy.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a bit. We've emailed a couple times, but haven't spoken in a while.
It's true. Yeah. Life goes on.
Yeah, exactly. Very true. So we're here to talk about your new book, which is called Uncommon. Came out a few months ago. I was excited to see. As someone who keeps writing books, even though I could find reasons not to, I'm sure you could find reasons to not write the next book, but something in you says, now you got to write the next book.
Yeah, the books kind of write us, I think, right? It has to come through you. There's a principle called Wei Wu Wei. I think I even might mention it in the book. Wei Wu Wei means action without the actor. So Wei Wu is action and Wu Wei is inaction. So when you put them together, Wei Wu Wei, you've got action within action, but what it really talks about is without the actor. And that what that means is the ego's out of the way. And so where I'm going with that is this is the nature of what it means to be a real, if you understand consciousness and spirituality, like we are being lived by spirit. And the cause of suffering, the cause of all the problems in the world is to mistake yourself to be an independent, self-organizing being with an individual consciousness, which is the Western way of seeing things, but it's actually not the way things work. So what I mean by this is, if a book wants to be written, it's being written through me, and there's no way in hell I'm going to stop it. I can slow it down, I can resist it, but if I stop it, then ultimately I'm doing a huge injustice because the words need to come out.
What are your thoughts about what you just said in the context of individualism, which is also, there's a lot of emphasis on that here in the West?
Yeah, well, I think individualism is a false ideology that's led to a lot of suffering, a lot of pain, because we, human beings are, first of all, we're not separate from each other. Secondly, we don't ever create anything of value alone, right? It is always a team effort, and it's always built on the backs of countless others. And so the ego that believes that it can go it alone, the lone wolf, and even that kind of American exceptionalism and sense of kind of being that pioneer or rough cowboy individualist, it always leads to less optimal results and regret in the long run, because at the end of your life, you're like, well, geez, all of that accomplishment was meaningless if I can't share it with others, or if it wasn't in service to others.
But at the same time, of course, if you swing to the opposite end of the spectrum and you are now into the realm of collectivism, and politically that would be statism, that's a horror, a different type of horror. Yeah.
When it comes to, I would say that the Buddha had the best kind of path, the middle path, right? Collectivism and having a belief that the state can and should control all the affairs of its citizens always leads to disaster in the long run. And just to let everyone be completely free would lead to anarchy, which means that then a lot of individuals would be hurt by those who have a lower level of consciousness, or are working on some extremely negative energy or negative karma, and so they're going to be a lot of victims. There's going to be victims in either case, but in one case, the victims are randomized and at the expense of the wolves, and the other, the victims are going to be at the expense of the state. The state's going to be the wolf.
I wanted to talk about the spiritual mountain. That was on my list of things. I had it later, but let's just start with it, because what I wanted to talk about, and specifically relating this mountain, and for people listening. So, Mark, in this book, you use this metaphor of different mountains we have to climb, and the spiritual one being one of them. And you talk about aligning your heart and aligning your mind to every action. And I was curious, what does that look like for you? What is your primary purpose that aligns your mind, that aligns your actions, and how has that changed over the years?
No, that's a great question. My purpose is to master myself as a warrior, leader, teacher, so that I can serve humanity. Now, how that has changed is I didn't articulate it that way. I would have said in my 20s, as I uncovered it through meditation, that my purpose was to be a warrior and to serve my country. And then as I evolved, I recognized that warrior was just one archetype, right? It was a dominant archetype, and it was very present still for me to this day. But eventually it gave way to where there was room for the leader archetype to emerge, the strategist, the alchemist, right? So those other archetypes are really starting to assert themselves. And it's while simultaneously the expansiveness of how I'm meant to serve has really dramatically expanded. And so it's gone well beyond, serving my country as a Navy SEAL to serving all humanity, to help uplift humanity, move away from violence and negativity. Now, this mountain, which I call Kokoro Mountain. Kokoro is a warrior term from the Japanese martial tradition, which means to merge your heart and mind in action, or a whole mind. So ultimately, it's kind of an uncanny thing to discuss, because you can't really, it's hard, right? Because from the Eastern perspective, we are already whole, right? It's our natural state. We're spiritual beings, having an instant of this kind of physical manifestation. But because the brain, the way it's organized and the way our training is in the Western world, especially, we are led to believe that we are an individual separate self. We call that the ego, personality, which has to find spirit somehow.
Or not, or we're just a brain and that's it.
Or you're just a brain. Yeah, exactly. A lot of people, especially the scientists, don't even think, they just think consciousness is a manifestation of brain activity. And because there's no evidence behind spirit, because it's all subjective, they just completely deny it. And that's nihilism. But you and I know, and most of the listeners know that, well, that's not accurate, because there is a spiritual aspect that we just don't understand it very well. And so it's very valuable to have an approach that is a process-oriented approach, which means we can work on the ego. And so this is like the Zen tradition of taming the ego. Some people talk about killing the ego. You can't really kill the ego. If you kill the ego, the body would die. The ego is necessary for survival. But emotional process, depth psychology, personal development, even physical development, like you and I, our core, that, you're training the body, you're training the mind. As you train the mind, you have more clarity of thought, you have more insight, you develop a little emotional awareness, emotional control, and then you open up to your intuitive centers, right? And then you're starting to be able to be much more sensitive human being, where you're now suddenly experiencing non-physical aspect, and you could call that spirit. We all have this much bigger component of ourselves, which is the non-physical. And so the Western model, and even to a large extent what I present in Uncommon, is this, and those are the 5 mountains: physically, really refining your body physically, so it's a apt vessel for this further development. And then mentally, not just leaving your mental development to like listening to a few podcasts, or getting another certification, or doing another course, but really changing how your brain and how your mind works through processes of breath work, meditation, visualization, mindfulness, and witnessing. And then recognizing that a lot of times we can stop there and think we're making great progress, but emotionally, it's the traumas of our childhood and conditioning of our upbringing that are inhibiting our progress. So we've got to turn to the emotional mountain and begin to do that work as well, or else we'll be thwarted in any further progress. And then that leads us into the intuitive mountain, and then ultimately we end up at Kokoro Mountain. But Kokoro Mountain's never not there, right? Your spirit is always there. You're just kind of like chipping away at the layers that are blocking it from being expressed in its glory. So that's where uncommon is unique. It's like this combination of this deep Eastern wisdom that says you are in your natural state, perfect, the way where you're meant to be. So own it. But from the Western perspective, like it's kind of hard to own it, right? If you're clogged up, if your plumbing's all clogged up because you're not physically healthy and you're eating like shit, right? And so physically you don't feel whole. You don't feel like a spiritual being because your physical vessel is corroded and corrupt. So we got to get that healthy. And then we haven't learned how to think well, to be positive, to be optimistic, to separate yourself from future and past thinking, to be more present. And in that presence, we can enter that timeless state where we have that experience of witnessing, awareness, and kind of more spiritual insight. And again, that leads us to the openings in the emotional mountain and the intuitive mountain. So it's a both and. We kind of attack it from both sides, so to speak. So I've covered a lot of territory here, but ultimately, from that natural state, you are who you are and you're perfect the way you are. When you tap into that through stillness, which takes a lot of work, as I said, then you begin to experience what the Easterners would call karma and dharmic energies, right? Karma is the energy that propels you into this lifetime. It's the latent energy from your past lifetime of desires and fears and the need to learn things that comes in, and that's going to like drive you to have certain experiences, which is then going to either add more negative karma or it's going to bleed it off and bring you some positive benefit. And then the dharma it's the calling. It's like how you're meant to serve. Like every one of us has a unique kind of imprint as to how we're meant to serve and the challenges we're supposed to overcome. And it's always, in my experience, it's not something about what you're going to do. It's not a career. It's not a job. It's this archetypal energy, right, of beingness or becomingness. This is why, when I was in my 20s sitting on my meditation bench, and this is before I joined the SEALs, I kept having the experience internally, both in a felt sense and also even just really subtle imagery, that I was meant to be a warrior. And yet there I was working on becoming a certified public accountant and getting my MBA, right? And I didn't feel like that was very warrior-ish. So I was doing something that was like physical karate and mental Zen. That was the first and second mountain. And it allowed me to tap into my intuition, my fourth mountain, which is that inner whisper, the inner voice of my heart, my biome. And that was saying that my inner intuition was telling me in its unique way that I was off target. Right, I wasn't going to be fulfilling my dharma, my calling of being a warrior, if I stayed this track of being a CPA and going and making a lot of money on Wall Street. And so I started. That was a pivotal moment in my life. I was 22, maybe 23 years old. I mean, at first it was rather jarring, almost like you would expect from midlife crisis, where I'm like, holy shit, I've invested a lot, but I hadn't really invested that much time. It just appeared that here I am, halfway done with my MBA, CPA, I'm barreling down the wrong road. But what a great opportunity to suddenly just sit there on that little meditation bench and to be told, stop, right? Or just stop long enough to pay attention and ask better questions. So I started to ask, if I'm not meant to do that and I'm meant to be a warrior, then what would that look like? And that's when I was showing the SEALs,
You speak with a lot of conviction, particularly about spirituality. And I think one of the challenges that many people have is, speak of intuition, they have an intuition that something like that is probably true. Different religions have different answers, but it can be hard to have firsthand experiences that take you from maybe an intuition to something closer to conviction. I'm curious what firsthand experiences you've had that, just my sense of my interactions with you over the years is that you've probably had a number of firsthand experiences that have logically led you to conclude a lot of what you just said, that it's not simply a matter of, well, these things sound nice and a lot of other people believe them and have believed them. So, and they confirm my biases and I kind of like it. So I'm just going to go with it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, most people, especially, I'm not talking about religion, by the way, as you know. I don't have a religion. I'm not a religious person. And the term spiritual and spirituality, has a lot of baggage attached to it for a lot of people, but we don't have much better term to use. And you're right. Unless you have direct experience, then it's going to be faith for you, or belief. And belief and faith are closely related. Faith is you don't really need to believe, you just trust. Belief is, okay, I believe this teaching, or I believe this teacher, or I believe my parents because they told me this and what to believe when I was a kid. And so you're going to go on that. Well, neither faith nor belief are going to lead to certainty. Only the subjective experience can lead to certainty. And the only way to have that subjective experience is if you're looking for it. So if you're a complete denier, you won't have it. And so that's just going to reinforce your belief that we're just physical beings with a brain, and the brain's creating consciousness. But if you are someone who's intrigued or interested and patient and worth investigating, then there's a possibility that you could have some direct experience. You can be that study of n=1 and actually find some proof. I was extremely fortunate to be 21 when I was introduced to meditation back in 1985. Had I not been, we certainly probably wouldn't be having this conversation. I'd be on Wall Street or back running, the Divine Brothers family business in Utica, New York. But meditation, and I believe that I was successful at 21 years old with meditation because, I grew up in the 60s and 70s, and there was no TV, very little TV, 3 channels. We had, of course, no internet, no iPhones, no video games. And so, and I had a lot of,
sounds like a paradise in some ways compared to.
It was paradise. And I was in upstate New York, and my family, my father was like, not easy to be under the roof, right? A lot of alcohol, a lot of stuff. And so I would spend a lot of time out in wilderness, right? So one of the most powerful ways to experience spirit is to spend a lot of time alone in nature, quiet, right? And so, people who, like will walk the Appalachian Trail, for 3 months, they're having 10 spiritual experiences. I used to go on long hikes with my brother, and I had so many really generally strange things that I experienced once we were in the woods for days and with no contact except for, with a few other hikers here and there. Also, incredible flow state experiences. I remember I used to run the mountains in the Adirondacks. I would get back to meditation in a second, but I jumped forward or earlier a little bit in my teens. And, I would cruise up these mountains alone. And I remember, maybe like 4 to 5 hours to like find my way to the top. These aren't like Rockies, but 4,000, 5,000 feet tall. And just from the sheer bliss of being in nature, of being alone, and the exhaustion. I remember once just sitting down on the rock, pulling out my peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and I'm just looking at this expanse of beautiful trees and lakes, and having this like radical kind of like first experience where I just shift my awareness just shifted perspective to what you would call kind of an out of body experience, where I saw myself from outside myself, right? And so that was like a really kind of foundational experience where I'm like, oh, the mind is more than the brain. And if that's so, then wow, that's how far does it extend? And
And also, are you your mind, or are you separate from your mind? Or
am I my mind? Exactly. What is this experience? I didn't know how to answer that back then. And I'm still not clear, right? And I think there's
that's a long philosophical debate that's still going.
Yeah, I'm very clear. I would say I don't want to tell you more than I know. That's one. Like I don't know, because I think it's possible that some people say, well, that's pure awareness, and I would say, well, pure awareness, but it's connected to my mind, right? And so there's a connection between pure consciousness, which the spiritual traditions call awareness, and your mind, and the witness is the kind of the doorway. And this is Suzuki in his book Zen Mind, Beginner Minds, talks about the swinging doorway that swings on the inhale and the exhale, and this swings between personality and just pure awareness, non-personal awareness. And the witness is that kind of doorway, right? the witness is connected to pure awareness, but it's also connected to your mind. And so those experiences that allowed me to say what I just said, to understand what Suzuki was saying, who was an enlightened master, didn't come until much later. But that experience of me having that kind of like shift in perspective, I believe meant I was kind of suddenly perceiving from witness, which wasn't separate from the mind, but it was more than the mind. Anyway, so that's an example. So when I started studying Zen with Tadashi Nakamura in New York City through my karate practice, extraordinary experience, because we had think about the 5 miles. We had the hardcore physical with the karate. We had the mental training with the focus, the concentration, the breath work, and now the Zen training. Emotionally, right? A fighting art is really powerful way to do some, kind of introductory emotional development work. You got emotional control. There's a lot of shit that comes up when you're getting your ass handed to you, time and again. And so it was a very rich environment for development, especially at a young age. We know with neuroplasticity and whatnot, your brain isn't fully developed until you're like 26 as a guy. So a lot was happening. So when I sat down on that Zen bench and I had started to have like real success pretty quickly, I could hold my attention really well. It took maybe 6 or 9 months, but I was able to hold my attention. And then I would routinely drop off into these like non-dual states where time just like was so malleable, right? Sometimes it felt like I was there for hours, but it was minutes. Sometimes I felt like I was there for minutes and it was hours, or vice versa. And whenever I dropped off into that non-dual kind of like ever present, fully present, radically here, but not thinking state, I would come back with some insight. And this is where, I earlier talked about starting to get the sense and the feeling and the ideas and images that I was meant to be a warrior. It all happened because of my meditation. So I was very fortunate to uncover that at 21 and practice it for 4 years. And it led me to completely change my life. I transformed from a young common guy who was trying to be, follow the common path and making a lot of money on Wall Street, right? And my peers went on to make a lot of money on Wall Street. A couple of them are running Fortune 500 companies right now. But I had transformed and I said, I saw that's not my path. And if I follow that path, it's going to bring me great suffering, or at least I won't be, I'll be living that life of quiet desperation that Thoreau talked about, or Emerson. And so I developed the courage. I built the courage through that practice to be like, I'm going to live the life that I'm meant to live. And that's to be a warrior. And then I was shown the Navy SEALs. And I said, when I saw them, when I figured out who they were, I was like, that's it. And I didn't even learn of them until I was 23. There wasn't much information back then. No TV shows, no nothing, right? There was one recruiting video. It hadn't been built yet. So back to your original point, how do you go from belief or faith to certainty? Is you've got to want it, right? And then if you want it, then there's practices that will take you away from just the experience of everything's happening out here, to draw your attention inward, to begin to experience the inner world, the inner domain. And in that inner domain, it begins to open up for you. And you begin to have some really interesting experiences. I've already described a few. You get imagery, you get sensations. You begin to experience the vast expanse of pure awareness, pure consciousness, which is alive. They use the term Sat Chit Ananda in the Eastern traditions. It's being, it's consciousness, it's bliss, it's love, it's life. And that's what we are at a non-personal level. We are all that. And you experience that. And when you experience that, there's no turning back. There's no question, right? It's a defining moment in your life. And you can also have really interesting mystical experiences along the way. And mystical experiences really are just kind of pointers. You don't want to like get too hung up on them, or too, like thinking, wow, I'm really special. I had mystical experience. It's just you're being able to access kind of the non-physical world, right?
I need to tell you about my best-selling fitness book for women who want to lose up to 35 pounds of fat or more and gain whole body muscle definition in just 3 to 5 hours per week, and without giving up delicious foods or doing grueling workouts. Now, the book is called Thinner, Leaner, Stronger, and while it cannot give you a toned, Hollywood babe body in 30 days, and it is not full of diet and exercise hacks for gaining lean muscle and melting belly fat faster than a sneeze in a cyclone. It is a science-based nutrition and exercise book that will demystify muscle building and fat loss and show you exactly how to get a lean, strong, and fit physique without spending hours in the gym every day and without giving up your favorite foods like hamburgers or pizza and even ice cream. And the kicker, you will see visible results in the mirror and in the gym in just your first month on the program that comes with the book. Now, how is all of that possible? Well, the truth is, muscle building and fat loss just aren't nearly as complicated as you've been led to believe. You don't have to obsess over clean eating. You don't have to avoid unhealthy foods like sugar or meat or bread. Some foods are more nutritious and should be eaten more frequently than others. That's about it. You also don't have to grind through hours of punishing workouts every week, sweating buckets, getting really sore, training until you are bone tired. Those things are completely overrated for gaining muscle and strength. You also don't have to slog away on the treadmill. In fact, you don't need to do any cardio at all to get rid of belly, hip, and thigh fat. Cardio can help, and cardio is healthy, but you don't have to do it to get into great shape. And those are just a few of the harmful lies and myths that keep women weak and overweight and confused. And in my book, Thinner, Leaner, Stronger, you will learn something that most of those women, unfortunately, will probably never know. And that is how to cut through all the confusion, all the clutter, and create clear, structured, no-nonsense diet and training plans that are tailored to your fitness goals and your circumstances and your preferences. And all of that is why Thinner, Leaner, Stronger is one of the most popular women's fitness books of all time, with over 500,000 copies sold in 13 different languages, and why it has helped tens of thousands of women of all ages and abilities transform their body composition, fitness, and health. The Thinner, Leaner, Stronger system of eating, training, and recovering is also supported by 367 peer-reviewed scientific studies that are referenced in the back of the book. And Thinner, Leaner, Stronger has been regularly revised over the years based on the latest findings in nutrition, exercise, and supplementation research, with the latest version, the 4th edition, released in 2023. So the bottom line is this: you can get that head-turning, beach-ready body without following weird, extreme, or complicated diet, exercise, or supplementation strategies, and Thinner, Leaner, Stronger will show you how. So get your copy now and start your journey to a fitter, leaner, and stronger you. What are your thoughts on the popularity of using different drugs to try to accomplish a lot of what you're talking about?
Well, I have definitely experienced many of those on my journey as a warrior to heal others. I have a foundation for vets who are suicidal, post-traumatic stress. And so in order for me to really recommend certain things, which included psychedelics, I wanted to make sure that I could understand them. And so I've experienced like psilocybin and ketamine and ibogaine. That was a real doozy. And ayahuasca. And what my insight and my experience told me was that they're very useful for healing from trauma, but they have to be done or administered in a very, very thoughtful way, right? With a lot of preparation, a lot of, care amongst the administrator or the facilitator. The situation itself has to be very well curated. It should be a small, I've been to ayahuasca ceremonies like 50 people, and I know heard people have been with hundreds, and I think that's reckless. Like, it should be small so that the facilitators can really pay attention to what's going on, especially with traumatized human beings, which is everybody. The space has to be held to make sure that energy that doesn't belong there doesn't creep in, etc. And then after the experience, there needs to be some hand-holding and reintegration that is skillful, right? So therapeutic process. If all those exist, I think that psychedelics can be very helpful for healing from post-traumatic stress, also from any type of real trauma, like sexual trauma or abuse. And it is useful also for anxiety and depression. And often anxiety and depression go hand in hand with that trauma. It can be useful for spiritual development as well. But, and this is a capital B, but I don't believe it is a spiritual practice. And I know some people do. I don't believe that psychedelics should be a spiritual practice. I think it'll lead to a bypassing. I think it can get people kind of stuck in this kind of like magical, mythical thinking, and even stuck in kind of astral level manipulation. And so I'm very, very cautionary about that. It should be. I like it for healing, but I don't like it for spiritual development unless it's maybe one or two. Let's just see what I learn. And it's mostly going to show you the emotional traumas and what needs to be healed so that you can move on in your journey. That was a long-winded answer to your question, but a lot of caution if you're just a recreational, you think it's fun, a lot of caution if you think you're going to use it as your spiritual practice. Best spiritual practice is to sit down and be quiet.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not speaking from personal experience, but if I were approaching this, for me, my instinct would be, well, if I'm trying to get out of doing the hard work and a lot of the stuff that you're talking about that you did for a long time to reach these heightened levels of awareness, and if someone was trying to sell me that I could shortcut all that with drugs, I would be skeptical. That would be me.
I think that's very wise. That's exactly right. I think, and that's kind of what I meant by the spiritual bypassing all the work, right? Go from zero to hero. And our culture wants that a lot. We're taught that we can go straight there. We have ChatGPT now. We don't have to think anymore, right? You just get the answer. Well, psychedelics have led to that. Here's a great story. So back in the in the 70s, LSD was the big thing, right? And a lot of the people who were doing the psychedelics were also connecting with the yoga, the Indian yogi tradition, which is the oldest science of mental development, spiritual development. I don't mean the stretchy bendy, just physical yoga that we have here in America. And so a number of these individuals would go to India and like meet some of the sages and learn from them. And so even the Beatles went down and spent time with Ramana Maharshi, and he was a great sage, Jnana Yogi sage. And Ram Dass was a Harvard professor, who had psychedelic experiences and went down to India and changed his name, and now is still very famous. Anyway, so Timothy Leary, and maybe it was Ram Dass and Timothy Leary, brought some LSD to Ramana Maharshi when he was alive, and they said, this is what we've been doing in the West. We're having tremendous mystical experiences. We think it's a solution that may, get us to where you are or where you're pointing to faster. Can you help us validate that? And Maharshi is like, okay. And so they give him a hit. He takes it. They give him another. Takes it. Give him another. He give him like 8 hits of LSD. And this guy, he is an enlightened master, meaning he's completely no sense of personal self there. There's no ego. And so his mind is working in a very different way. And people who have that state, that their mind is operating at like a theta level all the time in waking states. It's just extremely calm, clear, awakened awareness. Like, if you think about it from the perspective of that Western spiritual, like consciousness is living. Consciousness is actually what enlivens the brain. The brain is responding to consciousness. So thoughts happen, then the brain responds. So people think that the brain creates the thought. Well, so he's in these states where you put all this psychedelics in, and he's just like just breathing, meditating. And then he opens his eyes and looks at him and he goes, "Oh, I see." He goes, "You want to feel powerful." That's what he said to Timothy Leary and Ram Dass about the LSD. You want to feel powerful. He cut right to the chase.
Immediately makes you think of the CIA's involvement, MK Ultra, and there were other things. There were other things going.
Right, psychedelics. It's like a trickster, right? It can at a very low dose level, at a very just this. Okay, I got good intention. I'm going to try it for healing. Great, But if you get married to it, then it's going to own you and you're going to feel powerful, right? You're going to feel like you're special because you're having all these experiences, and you can change your name and put robes on and call yourself Ram, whatever you want, but it's all ego. It's still ego. So psychedelics aren't going to get you beyond the ego. And I know certainly people would challenge me on that. And I also know that I'm right.
Let's talk about intuition, which I thought was great that you included that in your book, because maybe it's a Western thing, but certainly the culture here that we're in, I don't know if Eastern philosophy has a different view of this, but intuition is often discounted as less valuable than rationality, or even something to be ignored altogether. Obviously, you have different thoughts on this, but I wanted to hear some of your thoughts on intuition and the role this can play if it's properly attuned, if that's the right way of putting it, or however you might describe it.
Yeah, I would say that let's look at the world around us and see how rationality has served us. We're on the brink of World War III.
I was just going to say global thermonuclear war. Cool.
Yeah, that's served us really well, hasn't it? So no, there's something beyond linear rationality that we need to tap into, and intuition is that link. It's the bridge to the spirit, or you could say it's the way that spirit, non-physical, communicates with us, that allows us to perceive things that are normally hidden from view. So let me give you some examples, and this even kind of like dovetails into kind of that conversation about certainty versus faith or belief. So like one day I was at SEAL Team 3 and we were doing some shooting training, and I was walking, it was 5 a.m, and I was walking toward the range, and I felt as if, I say as if, but I felt as if someone put their hand on my shoulder and whispered, "Stop." But it was like a forceful, like, "Stop now." And I stopped. And the moment I stopped, a teammate of mine had an accidental discharge, and the bullet went like zoomed right by my right ear. Had I taken that next step, it would have gone in the back of my head. That's intuition, right? Now, that's a powerful intuitive hit, an intuitive signal. You could say, how did that happen? Well, damned if I know, but I do believe the biome was involved, right? And so that we have the gut brain and we have the heart brain, and then you have the head brain, right? So the gut brain, we have neurons and neurotransmitters, neurochemicals in our gut, and they work through the enteric nervous system, and they communicate with the biome, all the little bugs in your biome. And those bugs, are able to communicate what they experience from the outside world that you can't possibly know, right? And so there's some capacity for, because again, everything's connected, right? At an energetic conscious level, they have this experience of this event that is about to happening, and they communicated it. And I was open enough. I've been training by then in meditation for 6 years. And I had already had a lot of other experiences where I believed in this. And so I was able to receive that. I didn't blow it off, and it saved my life. And I can tell you there's countless stories like that from SEALs and other special operators where they just trusted their gut or listened to their intuition, and it saved them. I had a friend, Mike Jaco, who literally tells a story in his book, Intuitive Warrior, about being able to intuit where IEDs were being placed and having his team kind of route around it, and finding out later that sure enough, there was an IED there that was, put there to blow them or someone else up on that route. I don't think we'll know probably for many, many, many years, like how this really works, right? When we're talking about the gut, brain connection. Same thing with the heart. Like you could say the intuition of the heart is empathic. And so you say some people are highly empathic and others aren't. Well, why? Well, it's because they're open. Their heart is really open, and they're able to receive energy from other people, and also able to give energy. So healers are able to heal, right? By sending their heart and their love energy into other beings, and which actually has a demonstrable effect in healing. I mean, Jesus was a greatest example of that. So that you could say is an intuitive strength, right? Or a spiritual strength. But again, spirit and intuition is like the language of the spirit. Another way to experience and express intuition is is the brain, the head brain, right? And the head brain intuition is experienced, as I mentioned earlier, through subtle imagery. It's not the imagery that you would expect with like a sports visualization where you're like, you're remembering an event and you're replaying like your sport. Or let's say, in your domain, let's say you're working on or you're coaching someone in power cleans, and you have them visualize the perfect power clean doing the weight, which is going to be their next PR, or like Michael Phelps, that type of visualization. What you get instead is like really subtle, almost background imagery, right? And it just kind of emerges. It just shows itself to you without any type of effort on your part. So that'll happen a lot of times. Like we do these extended breath trainings in our Unbeatable Mind training. This 45-minute, like really intense. We call it warrior breathing. And this is a pretty common experience to have this imagery just show. And some people, say that like a loved one was there sitting with them, and they could see and feel them, right? Or you'll see like an image in your mind, and it might be a teacher, a non-physical teacher, or animal that's there to be like a totem, kind of thing. It can be all sorts of things. You can even have an image of your future self, right? If you invite that in, and sure enough, like there he is or she is. Like it's amazing. So imagery, and also something called direct perception, right? This is trans-rational intuition. Direct perception is you suddenly have a knowingness of something, but you don't really have any idea why you know it. Like it's not something you studied. You didn't hear it in a podcast. And so that's directly perceiving things. And that's being able to recognize that information just came into you that wasn't something that you studied or knew. So the point with my writing that chapter is, again, we're in a world that is barreling toward, more and more distraction, more and more separation, less health. I mean, look at the health in this country is insane, right? And the fact that the government's not doing anything about it is crazy. You keep on promoting disease, related things to include more vaccines. But we won't go down that rabbit hole.
Now people have semaglutide, which I don't know if you saw. I saw a graph recently. Basically, the headline is that we may have reached peak obesity here in the West, because there actually is now a downtick in obesity here in the West, and of course it's driven by these GLP-1.
Ozempic.
Yeah, factually, yeah, which is an indictment. Yes, I guess, though, on balance, probably a net positive, considering how utterly destructive it is to remain obese.
Yeah, again, like any pharmacological intervention, I'm fine if it gets people on the road, but if it becomes a crutch, then it's just a burden on them as well as society. Because I saw some factoids that Ozempic could be like a multi-trillion-dollar product, and they're bringing it into like Medicaid, Medicare. So that means us taxpayers are going to be funding, right, an obesity pill that everyone's going to be taking, and if they come to rely on it and addicted to it,
which will be the intention. Let's be clear.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. Exactly. Then ultimately they're not, just because you get addicted to another drug and it strips some weight off you does not mean you're getting healthier, right, Mike? Necessarily. Anyway, I've talked a long time about intuition. So it has these nuanced aspects to it. There's the gut intuition, which is like instinctual, life-saving. I've had numerous moments that my gut saved my life. Then the heart's intuition, which is empathic, where you really feel like someone's really suffering, or you feel the energy of your team is really off, and then you're compelled. Okay, I got to do something about this, right? And there's like the intuition of direct perception, and that sense of like, oh yeah, I got to pivot, in my business, like something bad is going to happen, or like I've had this in the last couple of years where I need to shed some old structures and to release some energy so that I can really set the stage for the next 5 or 10 years, because I've changed so much since when I started my core business, which is SealFit, right? It's a very powerful, where I was going with that last piece, the world's barreling down this kind of like, seems to be a dark place, and exponential technology and AI and blah, blah, blah. And I do a lot of speaking to leaders, and they're all like, like Einstein's quote, we keep doing the same thing and expecting different results, but we're not getting them, because the same thing is all that Western left kind of brain linear, like cause and effect type training, horizontal training. And what I teach is to have them tap into the kind of like the nonlinear, which is the non-physical, which is the field of intuition and spontaneity and creativity, and that is the next frontier of leadership and personal development, because computers and AI are going to do a lot of that kind of linear stuff for us, but it's not going to lead you to massive innovation or massive creativity. Those are human skills. But to tap into those skills, you've got to teach yourself how to do it. And that means you got to slow down and be comfortable in the being space as opposed to the doing space. And we have such a massive bias toward action and doing and putting points on the board and oversaturating our task list here in the West, that we have to overcome that and start to do less things, do them with more attention and intention, and to become more present, and to spend every day in silence. One of my great quotes from another Indian sage, a guy named Punjab, said, sitting in silence is the most important thing to do. Don't waste time not doing it. And that's where you're going to learn to develop these skills.
Let's talk about the emotional mountain, which is extremely important, because ultimately every decision we make is emotional in the end. As De Bono said in his classic book, I'm sure you've read it, I think many people listening have, I've recommended it a number of times, 6 Thinking Hats. He said, quote, "When we have used thinking to make the map, our choice of route is determined by values and emotions. The problem, however, of course, is that very often emotions can dominate our thinking. Emotions can lead us astray." What are your thoughts on how we can develop a healthier relationship with our emotions and ultimately have them lead us more in the right direction than the wrong direction?
Again, you're going to get a different answer from me from like a classical emotion, something like an academic or psychologist. What we're dealing with here is energy. Thought is energy, and emotions are energy. So emotion is really just energy that has a particular experience and meaning that you place on it.
Maybe even a wavelength, so to speak.
Or yeah, it could be like, exactly, it's like a resonant wavelength, or energy is flowing through you. But also, if you don't allow it to flow, like a healthy individual who's got high self-esteem and maybe has done some emotional awareness development, will still experience the full range of emotions, but they won't block the emotion. They don't have unhealthy meaning making associated with emotions, right? So we might experience the same wave of energy that in one person might be experienced as rage, and another person it might be experienced as exciting anticipation of a pending event, right? Or excitement about, or just a wave of energy around the event that just happened that you're not going to label. You're just going to let it flow, right? Let it flow through you. Also, so it's important when we're talking about emotions to think that there's a healthy way to deal with emotions. I want to say manage, because management is like controlling, right? You deal with emotions by becoming aware of them and letting them flow. Because if you don't let them flow and you try to manage them, then they'll like really kind of lock down, and then they'll become trapped. Now, don't get me wrong. Like if I'm experiencing an emotion in the middle of a firefight, and that could be a debilitating moment, takes me off my gun, then I will manage that emotion, right? I will park it, say not now, but then I'll come back and address it and release that energy, right? And so that's like healthy way to deal with it. So emotions are really just a different form of thought energy that are experienced in the body. And the emotion can have a meaning or a story that it, that comes along with it, that either triggers it, preceding it, or that trails it, or both. But it doesn't necessarily have to have that, because a lot of times we're talking about energy from energy that gets corrupted by trauma in our early years, especially in our first, 3 or 4 years of life, where we didn't have the intellectual capacity and the ego development to deal with it effectively. And so some strategy was created for survival mechanisms, which was very useful at the time. which then later on was not so useful. So this is a very subtle, we call this subconscious program. It's a very subtle form of emotional work, right? There may not be some great explosive feeling attached to codependence, right? Or to anxiety or a feeling of worthlessness. This is where like NUI are very, like things that don't really feel like emotions, but just like angst, a general like angst, not feeling whole in your skin, just, being moody or, it doesn't have to have the charge of like anxiety or even depression. Right. So that type of emotion work, requires some real patience and courage, especially if there's like trauma that life-threatening trauma, like physical, mental, and emotional or sexual abuse. And frankly, that's more common than most people would ever like to believe or admit, based upon my research and understanding. So it's a very vast subject. It kind of bleeds into the mental mountain as well as the intuitive mountain and even the spiritual mountain. It takes a lot of spiritual strength, right? In fact, probably the quickest healing program for emotional challenging situations is like forgiveness, like the Course of Miracles. Just like go right to the spiritual truth that you are a spiritual being, and that you ultimately you are forgiven, and even to forgive whoever you think harmed you. That releases a lot of like truth, releases the darkness of the trauma, right? When you bring those truth statements in and you believe them, so you can use healing multidimensionally to really clean up the emotional baggage and emotional traumas. There's physical, like we know that physical movement, like yoga, right? So somatic movement, exercise it helps release and move that energy. Emotion is energy in motion. So you move your body, you begin to move the energy. It's why generally fit, healthy people who do a lot of movement and somatic work, like yoga, martial arts, dance, are usually emotionally more mature and healthy as well. So there's the physical mountain. And then we can use the mental mountain through meditation. The whole practice of mindfulness, right, is to develop the capacity to separate from your thoughts. And so we begin through meditation to see that we are not, our thoughts are happening, but it's not my field of awareness, where it used to be merged. Like I am this thought. And through meditation, you create that space where you say, I am this, but those thoughts are happening over there. So I am not those thoughts. And that's the first step we call metacognition, to be able to be aware of your thinking and to think about your thinking. But then it becomes one of constant monitoring or witnessing. And when it kind of locks into there, the combination of metacognition and witnessing, we begin to see the nature of our thoughts and the stories that are underpinning them. And even more and more of the subconscious becomes accessible to you. And so that's the way you use the mental mountain to really get into the emotional mountain work, as you start to see the stories and then you ask better questions. Like that I don't think that story is serving me, because every time, this situation happens, I respond in this way and it leads to this terrible result. So why do I keep doing that? Well, it's just who you are. No, it's not who you are. It's the story that was conditioned into this body mind. It's not who you are, because who you are is the one that's watching that can now ask the question. And so from that space, right, you have incredible freedom to rewrite the story.
I was just gonna say, I want to get to metacognition, but a random question that coming back to spirituality momentarily, because I'm genuinely curious as to your thoughts. If it's true that we are spiritual and that the essence of us is spiritual in some way, and if it's true that we've lived before and will continue to exist as separate from our body, which it sounds like that's in line with what you're thinking. And you've mentioned trauma a number of times, and bad things can happen to us early in life. Well, what about in earlier lives? And if that's true, then who knows how long we've been around for and what we've experienced. We might have experienced trauma that is actually inconceivable. Forget about taking a bullet or something like that. Again, if you have a spiritual essence that has been around for a long time, who knows what type of things what we've gotten up to. You know what I mean?
it's quite likely we've all experienced trauma that's inconceivable. And some of that energy can take lifetimes to kind of like heal from, I think. And same if you were the perpetuator of that trauma on someone else, right? There's a good chance that you're going to be experiencing what you doled out in a future life. The yogis said, and this is just like metaphor, but talking about like, it relates to what we're saying, that it takes 1,000 lifetimes to find yoga. And what they mean by finding yoga is to find a path back to your spiritual center. That's all yoga is. It's a path. It's a process. It's a set of tools and processes. And there's hundreds of different yogas out there. Each one has a different kind of take on, what's the path and the guru thinks is the right way, because they're all kind of from that perspective, from that individual's perspective. But the overarching Vedic philosophy of yoga, which says there's a way to reunite with your spiritual self, to reunite the ego, or yoke the ego with the spirit, said it takes 1,000 lifetimes to even be interested in that.
That's an interesting concept. All right, that was that question. Now, quickly, I want to come back. I know we're coming up on time. If you have a few more minutes, I just wanted to ask about this metacognition, which I think is extremely important and underutilized. You commented quickly on what that is, but could you explain to people what that word means and why it's important?
Cognition is to be aware of your thinking. Like when you cognize something, you become aware of it. Like, oh, I or you recognize something, you recognize it. It's like, oh, I'm forming an image of something I already known in the past, so I'm recognizing and recognizing it. So metacognition is, and meta means more expansive view, right? Beyond the narrow, right? So metacognition is to have a broad perspective of the cognition that is what you take to be your mind, right? Your thinking. And so let's say level one thinking is just be merged with your thoughts. And most people merge with their thoughts are kind of wrecking balls, right? They're just all over the place, right? They are at the vicissitudes of their thinking, and they often don't do anything to change the nature of thinking. And so they often, they're just playing out the patterns. They're just acting impulsively. And if their conditioning and their consciousness level is low, because consciousness, the more light and love you let through your mind and your heart, then the higher vibratory quality, higher conscious level you could say that you're carrying or you emit. And so if you're a really low level conscious person, then you're going to be in prison, or you're going to be a violent criminal, right? Or
politician, whatever.
You might. I was just going to say you might be president of the United States. I don't know. So metacognition is developing the capacity to go from that level one where I am my thoughts, to be able to either, just because of the natural development that you have in your intellect, or maybe your conscious level, or you've turned to a practice like mindfulness, where you, through some discipline training, you separate from the thinking and you see that, oh, I'm not my thinking. I have a more metacognition. I can cognize that I'm not my thinking from a more expansive perspective. Okay, so metacognition, and that is still like from the mind, right? And so the mind is it's like a computer in one sense. So if you want to partition your mind into hard drives, one way we talk about, like, the hard drives of the mind is the left hemisphere and right hemisphere. Left hemisphere is the rational decision maker. Right hemisphere is the creative, like, contextual awareness and pattern recognizer. Well, it's just like saying you have a hard drive, you partition it into two. Well, metacognition is like creating a third partition, which is watching the patterns and how they interact of the other two, and being able to begin to make some distinctions about the quality of your thinking. One of the most important distinctions is the litmus test of positive versus negative, right? I mean, you've heard that the brain tends to be 5 times more negative than it is positive, because it's all the conditioning. Like, media is so negative, news is so negative, even our language tends to be really negative, and humor can be really negative. And then, of course, we put a bunch of shit into our bodies that's negative, and that it just becomes a reinforcing loop. So metacognition leads you to see that, wow, I have a lot of negative internal dialogue and negative external dialogue. I've got a lot of negative information I'm allowing into my body and mind. And so then you can do something about that, because as soon as you stop putting all that negative information in, it has a dramatic effect on your mood, your optimism, and your your positive outlook and the energy that you carry and you emit to other people. So I teach people in my community is like, the first thing to do is get rid of your TV. I haven't had a TV, like a real TV, where I watch news or like TV shows with the commercials, and like I think it's almost 30 years.
Social media too. I understand if you use it for your work, but as just a private individual consumer, I just don't see the value.
I got on Twitter/X because I wanted to support Elon. I was curious where he's going with it, and I'm really glad that he bought it. But I can't spend more than a minute on there, and I just skip by all the crap. I'm like, I don't want to let that in.
Yeah. I just go straight to replies. If people, sometimes people ask questions or they'll comment. So I use it to try to interact with people who care about what I'm doing, but otherwise try to spend very little time on X. Although I like X actually. I like it more than the more visual. Like I'm not on TikTok, but Instagram, because I like the text base, because I like to read. So that is appealing.
Yeah, I've seen some really interesting things where people like thread things over like 8 or 10 posts. And like they go really deep on some really interesting things, but there's so much negative crap too. Yeah, so metacognition is a very, very important skill. There's another way to look at this. Like it's like for business people, you could say that like weekly planning, where you kind of like look back at the week and say, oh, these were my goals, these are my results, this is what went well, this is what didn't go. Like the weekly debrief. That's a form of metacognition.
Yeah. It's a good analogy too. Because a lot of business people will say how they get stuck in the business and they forget to make time to work on the business.
We've got to work on the business. That's a form of metacognition. Even like we promote a morning ritual and evening ritual. I'm sure you have very similar practices where, morning ritual is to prepare to win the day, and the evening ritual is to make sure that you retain the victories and learn from them, but also clean up any kind of mess you might have made during the day, right? You have an opportunity before you go to bed to like say you're sorry, or to be like, oh, you know what I mean? Like that could have gone better. Let me take this action tomorrow to make sure I can, fix that relationship.
Yeah. What less can I learn here? To use Jocko Willink's terminology, which I like, the extreme ownership, like extreme personal. Let me look at what I did here, regardless of whatever else.
What was my role? Yeah, you always have a role. That's a form of metacognition, right? So you're taking a look at the day and you're learning from it, right? And you're saying, that went well and that didn't go well. So I'm going to change some behaviors and I'm going to do better next time. Ultimately, we want to develop our minds to where this is in real time. Like you're able to in real time moderate and modify the thoughts and words and actions, right? Because we have such intense conditioning, and there's always going to be a pull to react based upon the conditioning. And metacognition allows you to, like in the SEALs, we say pause, breathe, think, and then act. So pause, breathe is the preface. Thinking is the metacognition. I'm looking at this thing in real time saying, oh, this is the compulsive, impulsive thing that's about to come out of my mouth. And I see that that's not going to lead to the results I want. So I'm going to interdict that or intercept that. And I'm going to shift my mind to a different, more positive thing to say or do or, respond. And then you deliver that. And with training, this can become lightning fast.
It takes training, though. I was just going to say, and I can say personally, in some contexts, I'm probably good at it. In other contexts, I'm not so good at it. When you're building a house that's been going on for 2 years and you just want it to be over and you're sick of hearing.
Yeah, or if you have some substance, for me, when I used to have some wine or something, it would like interfere with my metacognition. Let's just say.
That's funny. Well, I know we're coming up on time here, and so that was we got to most of what was on my outline. That was great. So a lot of great ideas. Really enjoyed the conversation. Before we wrap up, is there anything else that you would like to share with the listeners?
Again, the meta message here is don't fear, right? But recognize that you create your world. Right? Gandhi had it right. You can be the change you want to see in the world. If you don't like what's going on out there with all the craziness, then work on the craziness within yourself, and you will see the world begin to change around you. Right? And the way to do that is to slow down, do less, better. Thank you, Kel Newport. That's his thing. Do less, better.
Instead of doing things right, doing the right things, that concept. I mean, sure, you want to do things right, but you got to make sure you're doing the right thing.
And do fewer things, right? There's fewer right things, right? There's a lot of wrong things that you could do, and a lot of people do. But figure out what the right things, and those right things are always going to be aligned with that purpose, that archetypal drive, which then you can create a mission around, and how you're going to serve, and how you're going to be and show up in the world. So find the things that align with that, and then choose wisely, and then radically focus on those, and then say no to pretty much everything else. And recommit or commit to a daily practice of being in silence, and develop some skillful means for being able to take yourself there. And so we teach box breathing. Box breathing is a multifaceted practice. It takes people out of arousal through arousal control. Then it starts to develop attention control and concentration, like my Zen training did. And then it opens up naturally into mindful awareness, the ability to develop that metacognition. And ultimately, it will lead to witnessing as well if you stick with it long enough. So take on a practice of box breathing and sitting in silence every morning and every evening. And if it's only 5 minutes, that's fine, but do it every single day and report back to Mike in 60 days. And I guarantee if you do that every single day, ideally 20 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes in the evening, but it's the daily consistency, just like training in the gym, right? If you were coaching someone, Mike, and you said, yeah, we're going to get you your 400-pound deadlift, so you're going to go in and train on Saturdays, right? The chances of the guy getting to the 400-pound deadlift are 0.0.
Unless he starts with the 400-pound deadlift.
Yeah, unless he starts with 400. Exactly. No. But daily, right? Daily effort, consistent effort. Same way with meditation practices. So start a daily consistent practice, and the path to the stillness you're looking for is always found through the breath. So start with the practice like box breathing. And we have a box breathing app. You can learn more. Go to unbeatablemindfulness.com is our website for our training like this. We have a 30-day challenge. Yeah, unbeatablemindfulness.com/challenge is where I teach the box breathing and a lot of the principles we talked about. I have kind of like, it's a short, it's just 10, 15 minutes a day, all video based with some exercises. Really, it's a powerful 30-day way to get you kind of like jump started in this whole 5-month training.
Love it. That's great. And again, the new book is Uncommon. So if people want to check that out, they can get it wherever they want to buy a book. And social media, anything else you'd like to tell people where they can find more of you and more of your work?
I'm kind of like you. I'm out there, but I don't personally interact much, even though you might get a response that looks like it's from me. So I'm just very, I'm very transparent about that. It's not. It's my social media team. But we use, I have a LinkedIn. That's one place I actually do respond to people. I have a LinkedIn profile that's pretty active. I'm on Facebook and obviously Instagram and X. I got a YouTube channel, and I've got my own podcast, The Mark Divine Show, which is on Apple, Spotify, etc. You can learn all about that at markdivine.com, which is my personal website.
Perfect. Thanks again, Mark. Great conversation.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure, Mike.
There are very few supplements that I would say everyone should be taking. Most supplements are very supplemental by definition. They're not essential. An exception, however, a supplement that I do think everyone should at least strongly consider taking is creatine. Now, you probably know that creatine is the most studied molecule in all of sports nutrition. You probably know that hundreds of studies confirm that it can safely boost muscle and strength gains and improve muscular endurance. It can reduce muscle damage and soreness from exercise, helping you recover faster from your training. It can help you preserve lean mass and strength while you are restricting your calories during a cut, so you can maximally improve your body composition when you're cutting, which is the goal. It's not weight loss per se, it's fat loss and muscle gain, or at least muscle retention. However, what you might not know is that there is new research suggesting that creatine also supports various aspects of brain health and cognition. And that's why experts are now starting to think of creatine as less of a fitness supplement for meatheads and more of a must-have supplement for everyone, like vitamin D or vitamin K or omega-3 fatty acids, a few supplements that I also think everyone should strongly consider taking. And all that is why I just, and finally, I should have done this a long time ago. This was a mistake, but I just released a micronized creatine monohydrate supplement, or my sports nutrition company Legion has just released a micronized creatine monohydrate supplement, which you can find over at buylegion.com/creatine. That's BUYlegion.com/creatine. And in case you're wondering why creatine monohydrate versus another maybe more exotic form, or at least exotic sounding form like creatine citrate or creatine malate, it's because creatine monohydrate is the most studied form. It is the gold standard in the scientific literature of creatine's effectiveness. And contrary to what many marketers would have you believe, research has also shown that a number of these other more quote unquote exotic forms of creatine actually perform worse than creatine monohydrate. And in case you are wondering about the micronized part, that simply means that the creatine molecules have been broken down into very small particles, up to 20 times smaller than regular creatine monohydrate crystals. And the primary benefit is solubility. It mixes in water better, and it also can be easier on your stomach. Some people can get an upset stomach from creatine, and they often don't get an upset stomach from micronized creatine. There also are some claims about enhanced absorption with micronized creatine monohydrate, faster and more efficient uptake by muscle cells, but I think that is mostly speculation. So the bottom line is creatine is not going to help you pack on brain shrinking amounts of muscle in 30 days. It's not going to add another plate or two to the bar, but it is going to help you train harder. It's going to help you recover better. It's going to help you gain muscle and strength faster. And contrary to the supplement fake news, it's not bad for your kidneys. It doesn't cause men to lose their hair, and it won't make you bloated. So if you want to see for yourself, head over to buylegion.com/creatine, BUYLEGION.com/creatine, pick up a bottle, take 5 grams a day if you are mostly after the performance and body composition benefits, and take 10 grams per day if you want to also maximally benefit your brain health and cognition, because that is the amount that research is suggesting is optimal for both body composition, physical performance, and mental health or brain health and cognition, and see how it goes. Well, I hope you liked this episode. I hope you found it helpful. And if you did, subscribe to the show, because it makes sure that you don't miss new episodes. And it also helps me because it increases the rankings of the show a little bit, which of course then makes it a little bit more easily found by other people who may like it just as much as you. And if you didn't like something about this episode or about the show in general, or if you have ideas or suggestions or just feedback to share, shoot me an email, mike@muscleforlife.com, muscleforlife.com, and let me know what I could do better, or just what your thoughts are about maybe what you'd like to see me do in the future. I read everything myself. I'm always looking for new ideas and constructive feedback. So thanks again for listening to this episode, and I hope to hear from you soon.